أهلا وسهلا بالجميع بPsychic Militancy. My name is Lara Shiha, and I'm delighted to introduce you to our guest today. Before we get started, please make sure you like, subscribe, think about becoming a patron. These episodes go live sooner to you in audio form if you are a patron, and you can find us on www.patreon.com/psychicmilitancy. Make sure to share this with a comrade, get the word out. And I'm especially excited for you to get the word out today with my guest, Françoise Vergès, who is somebody that has been a pillar for my own growth, for feminist organizing, thinking, psychic militancy extraordinaire, par excellence, as we say. But so I'm going to hand it over to her as I usually do. There are many things I could say about her and how her work has been just so meaningful to the way that I'm thinking about psychic militancy, my own feminist approaches to the world, my orientation to the world. But I want to hear from her, and I'm sure you all do too. So, Françoise, welcome. أهلا وسهلا فيكي.
Well, welcome. Very happy to have this conversation, I would love, that we'd be together.
Yes.
But already, it's a way of meeting. Well, I never do that very well, but, okay. Françoise, I'm from Réunion Island, which is still dominated by the French state, and which has been very important in my life. It's a smaller island in the Indian Ocean. So already the Indian Ocean has been very important because it's also getting me away from the Atlantic paradigm and being much more in Africa, Asia axis with, and the importance of the Muslim world from the beginning, were there. I always say when I was going to school, I was walking by the madrasa, and there was a temple, and I had friends, they were Muslim. And so for me, when I arrived in France after that, and I noticed the Islamophobia, I was like, what is that? So it was already. So I grew up there. It was very important, as I said, because my parents were anti-colonial communist and feminist. And I grew up as a child and as a teenager, and I follow them a lot. I follow my father a lot. I follow my mother a lot. And so that was an education, which was totally different from the school education. So I had like two education. But I mean, the one I had at home and with the people of Réunion, in fact, shaped me much more than the education at school. I left Réunion. I had not finished high school because I felt that I will never finish high school if I was staying there. I was getting in fight with the teacher all the time. And I went to Algeria, where my uncle lived. My uncle was Jacques Vergès, who had been a lawyer for Algerian nationalists, and he had married Jamila Bouired, the heroine. And so I went to their place. This is also, for me, was also a second extremely important political education, to be in Algeria, to be in a country that had freed itself from the French colonialism, to meet this woman who had been icon for me when I was a child, to be in a place that was independent, to be a place that for me, I think was very important. So I did my baccalaureate, the high school diploma. And I went to France, but I couldn't stand it. So I stayed like a month or two, barely. I was supposed to go to the university. And I went back to Algeria. And at the time, I wanted to stay there, to settle there, in fact, to live there, to start to learn Arabic. That would be my home. But for different reasons, I left. And then I went to France, when also I was supposed to go to the university, which I did for a while, but then I started to be an activist, and I worked also, which meant that also that distance with the university was also very important, I think, in my making, because when I went to the university, finally, this was, because I found myself in the United States for different reasons. We can talk about it. It's not like nothing mysterious. This is when I went to the university. And so I had like years of activism and working as a journalist, activist, and also as an editor about women's struggle in the world. I did not so it was never the university that gave me, the feminism or decolonial thinking or whatever. I had it. So, but the point for me was like, okay, let's get a PhD so I can have a job perhaps after that. And these were also very formative years, the United States. And I was very involved in the movement against imperialist war in Central America then. I went to Salvador during the Civil War and to Panama after the invasion. And so that was very important for me to understand that that imperialist state was to be there too. It was also very formative. And then, so my point was, I was a little girl in Réunion and a teenager. And that was, and Algeria really also deeply shaped me. I think the anti-imperialist struggle was really what guided me in life, even though I did not say it like that, but it was that. And so now I write. I do also independent curating. I'm doing a film. I suppose we will talk about it. And still involved into what we can call political education. So working with collectives or young people, doing a workshop or reading seminar or going also recently a lot to meeting and public meeting for Palestine. That has been, this since 2023, a lot of this happening. It's a very, how can I say, very professional.
Yes, actually, I think you
Things
did.
I say, okay.
It's a very hard question to
Yeah.
locate ourselves, but I think you did it amazingly well. For me, you went right into the ways in which decentering, which I feel a lot of your work is about decentering hegemonic processes, decentering the imperial access, decentering Europe as the center of the world. I feel like you took us there immediately.
Yeah. I mean, if I say something a little less, I mean, I love to cook. I can say I'm a good cook. And I have two arcs. I say, one will go from Réunion and will go to East Asia, but also South Asia, because that's also what I learned. My father was a very good cook. And the other one is Mediterranean. So, it's go from Morocco and we'll go down Lebanon up to, let's say, Armenia. Not very good at French cuisine. Or
The biggest
whatever.
myth out there is the French cuisine. The biggest myth.
Yeah, the mega. So I'm not very good at that. Okay. And the other things, I mean, I know, okay, I love to read literature. I need to read literature. It's not just I need to read it. I cannot just read essay. And I used to sew a lot when I was younger, my own clothes. I was always been interested in that. And since I did not have a lot of money, then I was doing a lot. And also when I was going to party, I needed to have a new things every time. So I sew something for that occasion, and of course the next one I could not have the same thing. So it was always with kind of inspired by I don't know 18th century this or 19th century that, or I don't know some painting or yeah. So I did that a lot. And for a while, I sold my thing to get some money. So I did that too. And I want to go back to that a little.
That's impressive, and I think the through line is the creativity here, which I see not only in your work and in your writing, but the curating as well. I wanted to go back to Réunion for a second because some of our listeners might not be aware of the island of French colonization, but it factors heavily in your work. To me, when I read your work, when I listen to you speak, it feels like, again, that disruption of certainly of French colonization, and ownership, right? Continued ownership over certain spaces, Réunion being one of them. I'm wondering if you could just situate the island for our listeners. You started to speak a little bit about anti-colonial struggle, which your parents were a part of, which you are continue to be a part of. I mean, your family in general, we, has a long history in being engaged in anti-colonial struggle around this, but perhaps situate it for the listeners, and then also just how it shapes you, like the centrality of it in who you are, and then how you came to be. You gave us a little bit about it by way of Algeria, but wondering if you can give us a little bit more background so people can listen to the rest of our conversation with that in mind.
Yeah. It's a small island east of Madagascar, very small island, which was a no-native population. And when the French and the British wanted, to arrive, I mean, the Portuguese before, but then the French and the British, and competed to have, to get some colony in the Indian Ocean. It was very important because they wanted really to reach India and get the resources. It was very, very important. It was really a race between the French and the British. So the French took over that island, Réunion and Mauritius, and also try to colonize Madagascar, but they will be able to colonize Madagascar much later. And so there was no native population, which has also interested me a lot. How do we think colonization when you don't have a native population? And so some of the French will say, oh, this is not a colony because there were no, native population, so there is no colonization. And I always argue that colonization is also about, the regime of private property, of enslavement, of exploitation, of land theft, of course, and, and all these things. And so they brought enslaved from Madagascar and also the east coast of Africa, but also from other parts. I found in the archive, people also from Yemen or, Malaysia. So, they were picking, all around the Indian Ocean rim. So slavery was coffee and sugar, a big plantation. Then the French lost Mauritius to the British, and they kept it. And slavery was abolished in 1848. But in fact, the land remained in the hand of the white, supremacists. And then in 1946, when you had this incredible move of decolonization everywhere, and the French Empire was, falling apart with Madagascar, but also what they call Indochina, which was Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, Cameroon, Algeria, and everything. The movement in Réunion, but also Martinique, Guadeloupe, and Guyana asked for the status of department, like equality. They wanted equality. So that was, they won in 1946. And this was really the anti-colonial left in this territory. That is important to understand. But it was by the 50s, there was total disappointment. And you had the creation of Communist Party and also the movement. And that asked for what they call democratic and socialist autonomy, which was that they will be sovereign. And for just foreign affair and military affair, they will be on equal level with the French state. Everything else, they will be totally sovereign. This was fully attacked by the French, but criminalized. There were a moment in the communist newspaper in which my mother was a journalist there, and my father also. The word itself, could get the newspaper censored. There was even, for some years, it was also the photo. If you just had the photo of my father, you could, get a fine and be jailed. So that was really, so this way of me, I grew up in that situation of understanding that there was a France I learned at school, literature and, Victor Hugo and Baudelaire and everything. And there was a state. I don't think I put this word as a young person, but I understood that France was also a state, and that the state never hesitate to kill, to censor, to torture, to absolutely crush anything that does not go with its, decided. The second thing also I understood that the French will never really accept equality. will never accept equality of its colonized, and that the state will absolutely, rather have a war and send soldiers, that as they did. Madagascar was important because my parents supported a lot the insurrection of 1947, my grandfather particularly, and, defended and supported the insurrection. And that insurrection, already, for instance, the French threw people, the Malagasy, from the plane, that was not the Argentinian who invented that. And also they had a ceremony of submission when the Malagasy had to crawl on their knees in front of the officer to say that they surrender. So this I learned about, and for me that was really important to, how it penetrated my child, consciousness and my teenager consciousness, that the state will never hesitate, never hesitate. And this, I have carried that a lot with me. And of course, I saw also my parents being very well, constantly the police surveillance. And in 1964, my father was tried. He should have been tried for threatening the security of the state. That was something that had been, put together during Algerian war to really, really put people in prison that, that threatened the state, which means that you were anti-colonial. And so he decided not to accept that, and he went underground. And he wanted to prove that in this small island, someone very well known as he was, because he was the leader of the Communist Party, could hide because of the solidarity of the people. He wanted also to prove that despite white supremacy, the police and so on, in fact, you could hide and even hold public meeting. And that was also for me. I remember the first time. So we knew that my mother explained to us. And I remember the first time after lunch, I was going to high school. I was, I don't know, 8, 9 or whatever. And so I opened the door of the garden, and there was like huge police everywhere, like people with guns on the roof of everything. And there was someone who come to me and say, okay, we want to get in, because we want to search for. And I said no, and I closed the door and I run, and I went to see my mother, and I say, okay, there are, the cops are there and they come to search. And so my mother told me, okay, don't go to school today. And we were taught never leave the police alone in a room because they can put something. So we follow them, so that was also part of the education of like, don't trust the police, never trust the police, never cry also. My mother told us never cry in front of the police, never show any feeling. We were children and they wanted, so you don't see your dad, that must be tough and so on. So that was also something, like don't trust these people, never trust them. Never, absolutely don't trust them. Even where we were going, my mother was taking us to the beach. They were like two, plainclothes cops with us, following us. So that was also part of the incredible violence that the state allowed itself. That is not just, of course, jailing people, but also the pressure, the fear, the regime of fear of you can lose your job, you will not have promotion. But also the intervening, for instance, the communists could not baptize their children, and that was very important for them. Hindus could not have their ritual, so the Catholic Church, which was of course totally complicit with the post-colonial power, was doing that, or not. The priest will not come when someone died, which was also for people was terrible things. Islam was, like if you want to be Muslim, you just have to bow your head and shut up, like silence, and we will, accept it. So that was that Réunion was that for me, and also the incredible solidarity. And my parents took, I mean, as I say, I wanted to see that. I wanted to go to political meeting. I wanted to go to the, like meetings. I mean, I wanted to be there constantly, even as a child. And so I also saw poverty and racism. I did not learn about it at school or for someone. I mean, I just saw it from my eyes. And that I remember even as a child, it made me mad. It made me mad, really mad, really mad. It's like this incredible arrogance of the white, this incredible. And we had a teacher coming from France, which we call them Zorei, which is a word Hindu, a Tamil word, which has been, transformed into Creole. And they were like, they arrived, I mean, they were, at home. They did not bother to learn about the history, the language, could care less, could care less. But for me, it was also how the police, I mean, later on, I understood it's not because we were children that we will be protected. That childhood was not universal, will not be universal. We were the children of a communist leader, therefore we could be, like treated as adult. And of course, around, of course, all the children of other communist activists. So this constant repression, this cultivating a regime of fear, taught me also a lot how power work, how domination work, and how people are extremely courageous. And I'm always admirative of the courage of people, even, what some people here in France could consider a little gesture. But I know what it is. I know what it takes to say to walk with your head like that, not to bow to the power, to be like that. I know what the price is. So I'm always very, I think courage is too often not really considered as something that not everyone has courage. That's not true. Moral and physical courage. That's not true.
Yeah. One of the things that I love about what you're saying is there's a way in which you were reared in a different register, a register that's anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, but you're laying out also the ways in which even as a child you were attuned to the other textures that were happening at the same time. And I think one of the things is that certainly we see with the global rise of fascism and people, there's a level of consciousness raising that has been happening certainly in the last 2.5 years, but almost like an entry of a lot of people into the worlds that people who are marginalized, certainly from the global south, those under the boot of power, have always lived in simultaneously. And that's what you're sort of describing to us. The other thing is that everything you're saying flies in the face of what the French state and its peoples like to tell itself, right? About how they're different, how they're fair, l'assiette, everything that we know about the myth of French colonialism. Certainly, as a Lebanese citizen, what we have been taught about notre maman, right? And so you're just sort of laying out for us how this is not a new story, how this myth making has always been part of the fabric, how the psychological impacts that include the internalization of superiority and then the creating of subjects that are inferior, not because in essence they are inferior, but because power is marshaled to make them so, and all the ways in which the state will mobilize every lever it has. You're laying out when you were a kid to walk out into a heavily militarized zone. And sometimes we think that these are things like modern inventions, but there are all these different versions that power has always worked in this way.
Yeah, and I've been, I mean, the police archive have been released and given to the local archive in Réunion in 2024, I think. So I started to look at them in 2024 and 2025, between 1950 and let's say 1980. I mean, I could look for, but anyway, that was the intense moment of incredible repression. Of course, there are constantly report on my father, but everything. I mean, what I was interested also, Lira, is a machine of surveillance. It is machine, not just because we know, oh, well, the police, look. No, I was interested in the production of a certain also vocabulary, and imagining these people, taking note, then transcribing, then writing them in good French, and then typing like 6 copy of them because 2 will go to the Minister of Interior, 2 to the Minister, whatever. And so imagining like this incredible production, this incredible industry that mobilized so many people, and then also gave a certain, I mean, that vocabulary and the tone in which, these reports are written, and which is really something that is not just the criminalization. And there is something about the pacification, normalization of criminalization, because it's not necessarily, oh, these people are bad, whatever. No, it's a constant level of it's totally naturalized. It's totally normalized. The fact that these people are bad. So it's not necessarily even to say they are bad. It's in the vocabulary. And I was looking at the 1968 report of the police report, and I found report on me. I was a kid. I was a teenager. I was a high school kid. I was a girl. And there are some, and what is interesting in also, and you would be interested in that also, of course, that there was a suspicion through the report of me being a lesbian. Because I'm very close, and there was the name of the young woman of whom I was very close, this kind of friendship you have when you are a young girl. And so that also interested me, the body, that is, so it's not, so how these people look at us, and how sometimes we may lack even the vocabulary to describe what it is, that how they see the world, and so to understand that a guy had been, given as a mission to write a report on me, and it's very precise. The report is very detailed. So I was really, I mean, the guy did his work. And so that also, because I was beside my father, in my family, I'm not talking about so many other people who were, of course, I'd report on them, but I am the only other member of my family to have a file on me. And so my sister, I had a older sister, she shared her father ID, but she's reasonable. The one we have to keep an eye on is that one.
I mean, this is fascinating on the one hand, but also such a confession, right? And I think that's what you're saying, or the ways in which certain bodies become more surveilled and become legible to the state as dangerous, as a threat. But there's an always already piece of this, like the fact that you're a communist, of course, throwing, sexuality into it, all these ways in which a counter way of being becomes a fundamental threat to the state and its coherence. And one of the things that you're saying also is how you perhaps over time have learned to destabilize the givens. You said it becomes naturalized. And that's how ideology works, of course, but the givens of our world. And for me, this is a great sort of entry piece into your book. So folks, if you have not read A Decolonial Feminism, pick it up now. This is on my desk always. I did not just bring this up because you're here with me. It is a book, along with Fanon, that sits next to me constantly because it's that central. So, but it feels like you're bringing the fabric of this book into it, and I'm wondering if you could sort of, it's seared into my mind, into my heart, and has guided me about how I understand the world, imperialism and colonialism, and also a method. Like you lay out a method similar to the ways that you're laying out right now about how we read and track and denormalize, denaturalize, move away from the organic, the way that these systems try to sell themselves as organic. Can you talk a little more about the making of this book? I have a feeling we're already kind of there, so maybe this is a good way to move into it. I mean, for me, it feels like a love letter to comrades, but also like a journal of sorts to yourself, like a reminder of all these things that you're laying out in front of us. But I wonder if you could give some background history about how it came to be.
Well, as you are saying, I think it's very important also for us to challenge even the temporality that we are given, you know. And for me, that it was not the French that gave us birth, you know. And so in Réunion, we were not born, it's not the French, you know, because our ancestors come from very different places with their own ideas about, you know, life and death and everything. So for me, it's very, I mean, the refusal, like, it's not even, as I say, no, I refuse. It's like, no, I don't care about your temporality. I don't care about your spatiality. I'm not in it. I'm not in it. I've never been in it. I mean, of course, I accept, but I've never been in it. And I think this is extremely important. So decolonial feminism was also to challenge the temporality of Western feminism and its spatiality also. I mean, you know, sometimes they say, oh, Western feminism. I say, okay, you know, it's your things, you know, but I don't even want to have a discussion with that. Sometimes I don't even want to challenge it and say no and so on and so forth, you know, because I'm losing time, you know, I'm losing my time. I have too much to do, you know, I have too much work. And so it's like to say also from the beginning, you know, another temporality, another spatiality, other bodies, other imaginary. And I don't have to prove it against you. I don't have to go through, you know, that, oh, when you were saying that, you would, no, you don't exist as the measure of us. Of course, we pay attention to your existence because you spend your time killing us and, you know, torturing and bombing our brothers and sisters. But you don't matter that much in terms of your, you know, of what you will want us to pay so much attention to you. Fanon, you know, you may remember that say the settler is an exhibitionist. And I do think there is, you know, an incredible exhibitionism in effectively settler colonialism. But absolutely need also to be at the center of the play, you know, even if to be accused of crime, but still he will be at the center. If you tell him, okay, stay on the corner, we will call you when we need you, drive him crazy, or her for that matter. No, I mean, yeah. And so for me, it was like, okay, really a decentering that is not, does not go through saying that the center, you know, challenging the center constantly, but situating myself already outside of the center, you know, like, and without, of course, the illusion that the center, but not, I mean, the center is not the center. There is something called imperialism, called militarism, and they will kill and maim and torture, but they are not the center of our world. I mean, people in what we call the global south have lives that do not depend on these people, you know. They are, of course, impacted by the cruelty and brutality of these people, but they have lives outside of this regime. So the book was about also, I was totally annoyed, you know, by Western feminism, but even as I say, by the having to talk to them constantly, to tell them, you know, their demand of attention, you know, for attention, their incredible demand for attention. It's like, God, it's like, you know, like bad and spoiled children. spoiled children, you can, it's like, no, I interrupting the conversation, even with when they cry, oh, I'm sorry, I'm a white person, I'm sorry. It's like, no, like, please, can you learn to shut up once in a while, you know? So the book was about, okay, starting with women on strike, and these women whose work is not invisible, but they are invisible, invisibilized. And so saying, yes, effectively, a decolonial feminist will not be about women's right and equality, will be radically anti-racist, radically anti-imperialist, radically anti-capitalist, and therefore to some form of supremacist patriarchy. But it's not patriarchy first. I have no illusion of, patriarchal, but I always also quite often say that patriarchy has been racialized. You can be effectively a tyrant at home, a tyrant at home. But when you get out, you're just a Muslim, an Arab, and a black man. The white will be, don't fool yourself. Even if you're powerful, at one point you will be reminded that, you may be a billionaire, but you're still not white, So for me, it was that, okay, and to revive this, the fact that effectively imperialism is impacting women's life and colonialism in what we call the global south much more, to an extent that is absolutely, for me, it's absolutely enraged me. Because there was another book also I wrote earlier, was about when women in France were marching for free abortion and contraception. I know, they were right, that's not my point. At the same time, 6,000 to 8,000 women per year were aborted without consent in Réunion Island at the same moment. And my argument was, it's not a paradox. It's not, oh my God, something, from the past, from the colonial past. It's the same state that will decide who can have children and who cannot have children, and who children will be loved and who children will be abandoned and left even to die. So if we don't understand that, and we say woman, we don't, we will be in this liberal feminism, And there is in this liberal feminism a trust in the state. Trust in the state, that the state will protect us, that state will protect us against our companion, brothers, father, war, violence, supposedly. But the state will not protect us. The state will never protect us. For me, this is clear. The state, the French state, or the United States or British, whatever, will not protect us. They are the one who fabricate racism and fabricate, like effectively racialized masculinities that they will, of course, they will allow to torture. I move a little out of your question, but the systematic rape of a male prisoner, Palestinian prisoner, I argue recently, I say, we have to extend our, understanding of rape. Because if rape remains just male domination over women, which of course, I know it's girls and women who are the first victim, okay? Let's not. But the point that that men are systematically raped, reminding me also of this distinction that African-American theorists make between the body and the flesh. And say under slavery, men, black men and black women became flesh to torture, to maim, to sell, to traffic. And the body was white and fragile, and the white woman body, blah, blah, blah. And I think this is what's happening in Palestine. And so there is a way in which colonialism ungender, if we can say, or degender. So the fetishism of gender in Western feminism, when we look at colonial war, imperialist war, colonization, colonial regime, these different declinations of colonialism, of colonization, we do see that at one point gender is not at all what we have been told by Western feminists. This is very, for instance, that boys are raped in Palestine in the jail. It's really that you see that the question, and I don't think it's just about humiliating men. It's really, as I say, this distinction between body and flesh, and we see at Israel this also the way in which the Israelis show their body. The beach, and they are so healthy and beautiful, blah blah, so supposedly. And so that exhibition is to go back to the exhibitionism and seeing Israeli soldier, their fetishism of bra and nightgown of Arab woman and things. So to go back to decolonial feminism was effectively that this the Western feminism, the insistence of gender, and that absolutely really erase the way in which colonization and imperialism work, and degender or regender, constantly depending, and how effectively they construct their own masculinity and femininity. And I saw that in Réunion when I was going with my mother, who was a member of the Union of Women of Réunion, which was anti-colonial feminism. And for instance, they were against the French movement for abortion, because they say we have to deal differently because we have been aborted without consent constantly. So decolonial feminism was also reminding that. And the method, you were talking about the method, for me is also how we are trained from school, no longer to see what we have under our eyes. So we see, but we are taught and not to make sense of it. So for instance, for me, the question of cleaning women, it's not that we know they exist. We see them when we walk through airport or railway station, but we don't see them. We don't see them. And this question for me of how we are trained not to see what we see, what we see, was also important. And so how we are told to look like that and not like that. And I know that in our exchange, you were telling me about this question of the banana. And of course, for me, it was like, how do you take a absolutely banal object, like everyone knows about, like everyone knows through the world what is a banana? And it's the most famous fruit. And so not just looking through, okay, that's good for babies and elderly and the sick. No, but you pull what has to do with geography, anthropology, sexualities, gender, pollution, contamination, capitalism, consumption, music, visual culture. And then you expand your analysis. And it's not just, the way through disciplinary approach, but how it touched different area of our lives. And that's so it's also to make sense, because to absolutely denaturalize what's happening to us, because there is a sense of otherwise like, why is that like that? What is unfair? But unfairness is built in the fabric of capitalism and colonization. There is no, it cannot be otherwise. So decolonial feminism was, okay, let's be materialist also.
Yes, it's not an aberration. This is part of what you're saying. This is not an aberration. The contradictions fit within this. And one of the things I think that you so beautifully hammer home in a truth-telling that's unbending and militant, which is why I use your work so much and it centers me, is that there isn't a bending away. The seductions to bend away, to present oneself as a particular way, is also part of the seductions of a liberal white feminism that still demands that people become legible, that show themselves to be softer some ways and fundamentally are fixed in their positions. They're fixed in their positions rather than recognize that all concepts, all identities certainly, can be mobilized and weaponized in certain spaces and create fixed notions. Back to the concept you're saying about the supremacy that's involved with fetishization and also the exhibitionism. I just heard this morning that Zionists and IOF soldiers are already putting like TikTok videos up of the sexual fantasies they have of Iranian women after the quote unquote liberation of Iran, which it runs through it. It runs through it because of the supremacist nature that is inbuilt, like you're saying. That's the fabric of settler colonialism. That's the fabric of expansionism. It's the fabric of racial capitalism. That's why we see it all the time. And I think that your book, I want to situate for folks the piece about the banana that you were just saying. And I want to read a little bit. I will put this in the show notes from the book. It's on page 21, but just reading it closely. And I love that you said that you take something banal, you take something mundane, which I think is one of the easiest, on the easiest things to overlook because they hide seamlessly. The mundane, conditions us to look away from it because it's a space that has already been turned into normativity and turned into ideological common sense. So I love that you trouble this for us. And you say here, this is a presentation of a critical decolonial pedagogy. I used a familiar fruit, the banana, to shed light on a number of analogies and elective affinities. The banana's dispersion from New Guinea to the rest of the world, the banana and slavery, the banana and US imperialism, banana republics, the banana and agribusiness, pesticides, insecticides, the chloridisone scandal in Antilles, the banana and working conditions, the plantation regime, sexual violence, repression, the banana and the environment, monocultures, polluted water and land, the banana and sexuality, the banana and music, the banana and performance, Josephine Baker, the banana and branding, Banana Republic, the banana and racism, when did the association of bananas and negrophobia begin, the banana and science, researching the perfect banana, the banana and consumption, bringing bananas into the home, suggesting recipes, the banana and rituals for ancestors, and the banana and contemporary art. The method is simple, starting from one element to uncover a political, economic, cultural, and social ecosystem in order to avoid the segmentation that the Western social science method has imposed. I mean, the brilliance of that
That's
breakdown,
not too bad.
right?
Not too bad.
That's incredible. The brilliance of that, because it transforms a mundane thing into a contested conditional. And it shows us the regime of clarity and militancy we have to unpack every single element that this world constructs for us. Because part of what you're saying to us is if the world is saturated by racial capitalism, by imperialism, by colonialism, by the hegemony of power, every element within that also is saturated. And this practice of consciousness, in many ways, there's a piece of this that I'm taking up in my new book that's coming out in May, but this political commitment to practicing this method is one of the ways in which, maybe like you're saying, we unlearn the misattunement that schools and this world are insistent upon for us. So I'm wondering if we can apply this banana method to the current day events, like if you might have an example that does this or something that you think about or associate to that deserves our attention, like our urgent attention to do this method together.
Yeah, perhaps something, in fact, I would like to have your, how you will react to that. When you had the flood in Pakistan, remember, in 2022, the terrible flood, I read about, the flood, and I read about everything. In fact, also it was one of the consequences of the way in which the British transformed that area transform the irrigation because they knew better, of course, engineers. And this was a place that have known flood for centuries. And then because of the British, it became much more dangerous. So that was one point. But my point, to go back to your point about the mundane, what I read, among many, many things, it was nobody had thought about the fact that there will be pregnant women. So out of 1 million victims, there was like almost 400,000 pregnant women with no care for them, no medical care, no whatever. So there were a lot of stillbirths and so on. And this was like, but this is like so banal. This is like so banal that there will be pregnant women. I don't know how many, but there will be, right? And there were other stories. And then you had the earthquake in Turkey. And I was reading also about it, and I read about the corruption, the fact that it was, and how Syrian refugees were not, there was not a rush to save them. But buried among all this, nobody had thought of bringing sanitary pads for the women. And the banal things, again, like, women from, 12, 14-year-old to, 58, like every month. And this is not an extraordinary fact. It's banal. It's mundane, again. And then I read about Palestinian women in camp in Gaza who had to cut, their tent to do that. And that, for instance, the Israeli state was forbidding the entry of hygienic products. All of this, the concentration on the body, on what I call vital needs, that has nothing to do with desire. Like, I need to urinate, I need, like, it's not nothing to do with desire. It's not something to do with the fact that you have a body and, and there are things that I cannot control. And of course, for women, demonstration and, no intimacy. I was reading also a story of a young girl in Gaza about her difficulty to go to the toilet because there were none, and to be in the open, and how that was almost terrible, and she would rather be sick. And Lara, it's really touched me a lot, because it's really about something that you cannot control, and so that the targeting of these vital needs that are daily, that are in the fabric of our lives, of our daily life, and they are absolutely mundane. And the constant repression about that in colonization, and no access to water, or or privatization of water, or so all this, that will affect the body. Not in terms, again, of, desire or sexuality, but about, like the banal thing of being a human being. And so that really, how do we reintroduce, the mundane and the banal in our struggle? How do we start from vital needs, the satisfaction, access to vital needs for everyone, which mean land, water, air, but how this is being privatized, and how there is a normalization, a banalization of the denial, the structural denial of these vital needs. And I wanted to see that it was not just during war or what we call natural catastrophe, but I was sure it will happen also in rich country. And then I read that in some, for instance, factories, you have to wear diapers because you will not be allowed to go to the toilet, and so, and in the US or in Europe. So so how do we bring in our struggle, what in fact was part of the anti-colonial struggle of the 60s and so on, that you need to attend to the vital needs of the people, that part of the liberation. It's part of the liberation and the dignity. And so that question of the mundane and the banal, and why it disappears sometimes from the way in which we think liberation. So I've been listening to you, I have been reading you also, and I wanted to also to say what you will think. How did you, about what I say? What would be your reaction also as as also a conversation, because I know it's also I've been listening to you and the importance, of course, and how this denial is also related to form of psychic wound. I don't find the word, but I mean, of humiliation and but deep
Yes.
humiliation.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah. I mean, part of what I love about what you're saying is that you're bringing us back to where, you started us and about the machinery. You said I was interested in the machinery that was constructed to do all this violence. And I think the best way to do that is to hide it in the banal. But part of what I also hear in what you're saying is that part of our militancy or our commitment to an anti-colonial, anti-imperialist struggle is to always remember that it is an infrastructure and machinery that's working that de-exclusivizes places. Like in many ways, I think it's easier for us to see it in Gaza, and we should, because we see it at a spectacular, rate and in a way that is, evident, so
yeah.
violently and and perversely present. And yet part of what you're saying is that if you pay attention to the flood, which can look like a natural disaster, right? There's a seduction for us to think about it in this way. If we think about farmer laborer movements in India, if we think about Kashmir, if we think about using forever chemicals in Lebanon, if we think about Cuba, if we think, I mean, you can do a
Yeah,
loop of the world and say that
absolutely.
part of what I hear you saying, or where I'm drawn to, is to say this political commitment is also one that de-exclusivizes the locale and instead troubles the condition, because the
Hmm.
condition has a portable logic that creates psychic suffering as well. It creates physical
Yeah.
suffering. It makes the hierarchy of needs one that becomes localized in the individual rather than a right of living. Then we're in the position, kind of like you were saying with white femo imperialists, that you have to argue your position up front rather than say
Hmm.
this is a demand
Hmm.
as a precondition
Hmm.
to everything else. People
Hmm.
should have access to water, air, land. That
Hmm.
feels to so many people like such a large and sort of outrageous demand, and yet it is the most basic one. And so maybe I think you refocusing us on the condition, that's where I go with this, is saying, okay, that
Hmm.
is the political commitment. And if we are serious about the work of liberation, of anti-colonial
Hmm.
struggle, the
Hmm.
condition that creates this type of suffering in a way that can
Hmm.
also hide as a problem of that space rather than as a
Hmm.
problem of,
Yeah,
right, imperial violence and colonialism and racial capitalism.
absolutely.
That's where we
Yeah,
start to get.
absolutely. Yeah, and again, I mean, about all this work about, whose life matter. For me, I was trying to explain that to some place with Western feminism. I say your body, your life. I mean, your healthy body, your life rest on the exploitation of 20 or 30 bodies. The person who is, cultivating the avocado for your avocado toast, the one who is, doing the yoga mat that you're going to use, the one who clean the yoga place where you're going, the one who, satisfy the sexual needs of your husband, the one, etc., etc., etc. And I think, like, how do we make that really legible? So it's not just, it's how, I mean, again, your banal life, like that, how this is hidden, your life, the fact, and the life of your children that are more or less comfortable, having access to fruits and vegetables every day and things like that. Rest, really. And so it's not abstract. It's not abstract at all. It's not about, oh, yeah, we're sad that, children are exploited in the global south. No, for your body, to be that body, it requires that other body will be deprived of water, hygienic product, decency, intimacy. There is no other way, So it's not about you, I don't know, doing little thing like recycling your paper, that will not change anything, It's much deeper than that. It's so psychic for me, militancy, and it's also about that, how this incredible naturalization, it's covered even under history, like that. But how do we again show the materiality of exploitation, that it's deep in the body of people and in their psyche? It's not just they don't eat 3 times a day. That's sad. No.
That's right. That's right. And fundamentally, for you to live like this, it has to include the exploitation, domination, and coercion of others. That's the basic premise here. So what are the ways that we might disrupt that? I think that's, for me, part of what your work does is always invite us into troubling the fixedness of that, and to implicate us in this struggle, and to say that part of the trappings of white femo-imperialism is to imagine that you can fight these fights without paying attention to that me just becoming a boss is going to fix all of this, or being the head of empire as a Black woman is going to fix all of this, right? I think, your work has been very clear to me about saying no, and youth believing that is also part of the myth making of imperialism, and part of how we sort of get stuck there. I'm wondering where the state of affairs are right now in France around these issues. I mean, I feel like if I had you living in the place that I was living, I'd be like, fuck yeah, I'm going to be doing everything that she's doing and thinking. But I am well aware, as I know you are, and some of our comrades that we share, that there's a troubled space in France around these ideas. So I'm wondering if you could let us know what it looks like. What are some of the contradictions? What are some of the tensions?
Well, on the one hand, things have moved, and nonetheless, there was a big demonstration against Islamophobia, and finally, some people of the institutional left marched with us. So that was, and also there is an understanding of racism that is structural. We fought enough, for a long time for that, but it's a really neoliberal government. We intend of crushing every movement. There is a huge criminalization of pro-Palestine solidarity. People are very, very, incredible, a lot of pressure. I was, for instance, invited to a seminar by a university. And the student that fought to have this seminar is about Palestine. And so they invite people about, the land, the history, different, approach. And the president told them, if you want to keep the seminar going, no Françoise Vergès. And okay, so they told me that I say, okay, if you want to keep the seminar going, please, I'm not going to make a fuss, I'm an activist, so I will go by what you are saying, what you are asking me, that not making a fuss about it. So there is that. It's incredibly racist. The French, for instance, replaying today in 2026, Algeria, it's like, guys, you lost in 1962. It's done, okay? Bye-bye, But they're still replaying. There is something about, nonetheless, the French society that is incredibly colonial. And I think also being very afraid that they understand they are losing their status. And white people are very anxious about that. I think this feed partly the far right, their adhesion to far right, not being much anymore, having to share the world with other people that until now they thought they were superior to, even in a paternalistic way, but at the same time, the last election for mayorship, a lot of the Black and sub-Saharan African and North African men, mostly men, won and became mayor. And you see the incredible pride for them to be recognized as French. They sang La Marseillaise. And I have to say that I cannot sing the Marseillaise, but this is beer, but that's something else. I mean, I have comrades who say, no, that's good, that, because now it's their country. And it's true, it's their country. It's true. They are French. So they have a say in the country. I suppose that for me, the only thing that I say that I'm coming from a place that is still colonized. So I cannot have the same, I suppose, the same, how can I say, enthusiasm. I think, I nonetheless, okay, this was an incredible victory, but I have not seen a lot of protest, against the war in Iran, against Iran. I mean, there is a stupid things about Iranian women. I saw it even in a, public meeting for Palestine, that a young woman, arrive and say, okay, it's not because we are against US imperialism that we should support the Iranian regime. I was like, oh God, no, oh God, do I have to hear that? So there is a lack of, there is still a lack, I think, of understanding what it is and what is liberalism. And also, this woman's right is strong. It's quite strong. The fact that women are oppressed and we should save them, even though it's true in many cases. So I have to say that sometimes this is me, Rera. This is not a political analysis of the situation. I feel lonely, but I suppose that if you're in psychic militancy, as you call it, you have to accept sometimes solitude. Otherwise, do something else, But that you have comrades, but there are things that I'm too much, I think, an anti-imperialist.
No such thing as too much. And we might not be in the same place, but we're comrades and we share it. But you're right. I think it comes with the terrain, is that if you are militant about your positions, if you're unbending, if you, to borrow from Sarah Ahmad, commit to being a feminist killjoy, if you are, follow your method, is that there are ways in which we will find ourselves alone, but connected across geographies, in defiance of geographies, with comrades who move similarly. One of the things that in our conversation leading up to this, you'd brought in the psychic realm, of course, psychoanalysis. Then you and I joked before we got on here about how Rudenesco owns that space, and how she, to me, is the representation of white, femo-imperialism extraordinaire. One of the most violent people I've seen that uses and weaponizes psychoanalysis in a very specific way. But how's your sense of, the writing out of certain methods of reading why the movement might look like this in France? I mean, to me, it's not about psychoanalysis as like being uniquely positioned. I happen to be trained in it, so I'm always interested in subverting it and not allowing it to unfold with the innocence that it relies on. But if nothing else, it tells us there is such a thing as a psyche, and that the psyche is contested space. And so that seems important. But what's your reading of like?
Well, that has been always important for me. I don't know how I came to it. I cannot say that, there was this movement, but I was interested very quickly. And when I arrived in France in the 70s, I got interested. There was also a lot of movement, anti-psychiatric movement, and also contested psychoanalysis and reading a lot, everyone, like from, of course, Winnicott, Melanie Klein, but also people from Argentina and things like that, and also from Senegal, but also Senegal and South Africa and things like that. So for me, I mean, the question of the psychic has always been important. Also, I suppose, because I do think, Rera, that power can nonetheless destroy also psychically, can kill psychically. And it's important to know that. They don't just kill, physically. And I have seen people destroyed psychically, they could no longer make it. I mean, it was too much. Something was too much. And so how do we address that? How do we address that? And I heard you also in one of these exchange talking about effectively how power wants us to bend, to become, so not passively, they will accept perhaps some contestation, right? But as long as it remains within a certain space and a certain vocabulary. And so how do we train ourselves also to resist here, to have that? And so how, for me, it was always been important to understand how fear that power use function, and not to accuse people of being cowards, too easy. So how do we enter in this incredible, when we get into it, in that question of the psyche, without falling, as you say, into some kind of general statement, but that we acknowledge that there is a dimension that cannot be just resolved through ideology. And how do we politicize that? And there was that moment in the 60s, 70s in South America, in Senegal and Algeria, but now it's practically lost. And in France also, it's quite lost. I mean, it's moving a lot towards neurobiology and things like that. And there is a lot of trust into form of self-help therapy, because of constant distrust into psychoanalysis. And I want to be clear about psychoanalysis. I'm not talking about the people who would do that in terms, but some of them also are doing good work, right? It's not, but in the fact that what is a psychoanalysis telling us, what Fanon tried to tell us, what others, try to tell us, those who work in South America and Central America, when you had torture and dictatorship and all this, and what they understood of what was going on, and how effectively what will be psychic militancy in moment like that, or what's happening today, of course. But as you were saying before, it's not just today, that has happened before. And I do think that there is a loss of that in France, but also I was talking in France, in Italy, when in Italy the movement was very, very, very important. So there had been a loss of, on the one hand, I will say effectively not trusting, feeling that psychoanalysis was a passive, will be there to pacify, which is partly true, but in the movement, dropping everything practically, and sometimes using a psychoanalytic term in a way that I think much more ideological, and not letting it, in the messy part of what we are also, and approaching that as if this is how can I say, a map that we will circulate, and not allowing to some moment of things being said and you don't quite know how to answer. There is a lot of suffering, there is a lot of mental, what we call mental suffering, but a lot. It's incredible, and it's growing, and there is no answer to that. I mean, there is institutional answer, which is more and more chemical, and less and less effectively taking care of, like listening or what trying, and collectively. And so I don't. Sometimes I don't feel that we, whatever this we, are prepared for that, or are really paying attention to that incredible mental suffering that people are going through, and which also happened with COVID, and for the young people, and with the climate disaster and the war everywhere, the genocide in Gaza, the war against Iran. I mean, the falling, that everything is falling apart, right? Is that, and so what is effectively the psychic militancy that you can do, that will people will feel, okay, there is something there that that I can do, and I'm not gonna fall apart. Because of course there is activism, and it hold you, and the collective hold you, but sometime within that holding there is not enough attention sometime to some that if we and then we learn that some comrade is being as asked to go to the psychiatric hospital because he or she is not cannot do it anymore. I mean, cannot stand it anymore, or kill herself or kill himself. And so how do we do with that? And that was there were more attention to that in the 60s, 70s, I will say. I don't know what's your
Absolutely. I think you're right that I think this notion that somehow it's a bourgeois enterprise. Psychoanalysis as an institutionalized form has a lot to blame for that, and they did it on purpose. It was a political project, right? It's not the psychoanalysis of Deleuze and Guattari who are sort of thinking through these things and being devoted Marxists and materialists, like you were saying. So I think that if we track even though psychoanalysis wants to sell itself as a non-political actor, the political project of domesticating it within the clinic and separating it from Fanon's sociogeny is part of how we end up here, I think. So the instinct of revolutionaries to reject the neoliberalization of it is a good one. But at the same time, we're losing every revolutionary, every political prisoner we know studied the way that the psyche is part of the contradictory machinery, like you were saying, and the ways in which these systems intend to intrude on our psychic space. They intend to steal our mind. So what are the ways in which we can remain militant in being aware of that is a factor in it? And even as outwardly everything moves to neurobiology and cognitive behavioral therapy and pop psychology and self-help, like you're saying, one of the things that I discovered in my research for this book that's coming out soon is that the counterinsurgency manuals by the architects of psychological warfare continue to use psychoanalytic principles of the unconscious, of impressing on people's minds, of creating, attacking the psychic, relational, social fabric. So outwardly, you are telling people you are behavioral beings only, but to mobilize power, they are using all the tricks that, Sigmund Freud set in motion and our comrade Fanon warned us about. So it's a good reminder, I think, for us to reclaim it. Part of what I say is that we need to seize the means of production. If we're, instead of making it a bourgeois practice that replicates the social order and creates the individual, what does it mean for us to make sure that it, among other things, are also used as a weapon for liberation?
Yeah. And so, because also it tells us that we remain individual, but not individualistically. And so the collective is also about taking care of this, and I remember I was in Brazil and I wanted, I say, it was a launch of a book, and I asked to meet with women's group, but not, from academia or whatever. But yeah. Anyway, so some women were telling me about how do they protect themselves from a psychic assault. So it was not just about the violence, physical violence, but effectively the psychic assault, and they had no place to talk about that. In the activist, the militant space did not allow really for that. So they had to turn to what it's called traditional, which does not mean so much, but but sometimes they could not find really, yeah, to be heard, to feel to be heard,
Yeah.
and to have the space for that.
Yeah.
I'm that. And so for me, I'm very sensitive to that. When I see people, when I understand that there is a dimension of psychic suffering, I'm very, because I see that there nothing is being done, and it because it's really suffering. It's real suffering. It's not a metaphor. It's not a metaphor.
No.
And, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, as you say, reappropriating this, because I mean, some years ago I was in Dakar, and they were, it was a meeting from a lot of people from sub-Saharan Africa, but also North Africa, and there was a panel about psychiatry, and they were telling me that everything that had been tried, either the school of Dakar or Blida, the experience of Blida, or in Tunis, what Fano had done, but also other places, was totally abandoned. And they told me it's back to camisole. I say, yeah? And they say, yeah. They say, yes.
Yeah.
And they say, in fact, even people don't want to send the member of their family to these places because they don't, but so they don't know what to do. And sometimes they will attach the person, because the person, will do whatever, whatever goes through her mind. And because they did not know what else to do, and they did not want either also to abandon that member in the street or whatever. And I was saying, oh my God.
Yes.
That's terrible.
It's why we have to pay attention to it. So as we're winding, I mean, I could talk to you for so long, but I need to give you your life back in a little bit. But I wonder if we could, as we're winding down, end up with this wonderful project that you're working on right now, and give people a little bit of a preview. You shared with me that you're making a film, and that large part of it is based on the archives of your family and the
Yeah.
anti-colonial struggle in Réunion. So I wonder
Yeah.
if you could give us a little bit
Yeah.
of insight into it.
Yeah. So my mother died in 2012 and my father in 2016. My father, well, his mother was from Vietnam, and his father was from Réunion. And I mean, there is a story also, because my grandfather met this young woman, this young Vietnamese, and married her, and had two sons, Jacques Vergès and Paul Vergès. And the fact that he married her and recognized the children, it was a scandal for the colonial society. Because you could have a mistress and even have children with her, whatever, but you don't marry her. So that was also part of the family narrative. And it was very important for me. And when my father, one of the attacks also about my father was, since he was partly, Asian, and for the white people, or everyone is Chinese, right? Whether you're Thai or it was Chinese. So anyway, when they died, I gathered all the archive and I went through it. And even though I thought I knew my parents' life, I discovered a lot of things, and how they were absolutely committed to the struggle. It was incredible. I mean, these were two, and they love each other. When my at one point, I was going through their paper, and there was an envelope, and I opened the envelope, and there was a lot of little, very smallly folded paper, and so I unfolded them. It was a love letter of my father to my mother when he was underground, and so her letter were not kept because he was, constantly moving. And in this letter, I see that he's answering, to something she had said, and she's a little, I don't know, concerned, and he said, "No, be strong, I love you," and so on. And for me, it was like, oh wow, it was like I was like so, like so. The story also of love and activism. So my thing, I wanted to do a film on that, but it moved to how anti-colonial communism also, which I think is totally ignored in Europe, because communism also only exists in Europe, and the way in which, for instance, if there are communists in the South, they have to be compared to someone in the North. So, for instance, I've been asking to write something about Amel, the communist from Lebanon, and so it has to be a Gramsci of the Arab world, right? And it's not Gramsci being, the Amel of your. So all these things also started to annoy me a lot. The constant fact that we cannot exist without, having, a father over there,
A reference point.
or a mother over there, and then we will exist, So that was also to revive this idea of anti-colonial communism, and what kind of communism was in the South, which was not at all what you had over there. The same way of what you're talking about, effectively also psychoanalysis from the global South, and everything like that. So I wanted also to show that, to talk about that in the film, and how come a communist party in a moment of the Cold War, but also of incredible decolonization everywhere, and the connections through of my father to his brother, to his twin brother Jacques Vergès, and his involvement in the defense of Algerian nationalists, also was the internationalism, so and anti-colonialism and internationalism very strongly. So I want to weave, like, it's going to be my story because I'm not a journalist. It's also my story as a child and as a teenager, but at the same time to talk about all that, and also to celebrate the people of Réunion who made it possible, who were so courageous and defy the power and fought against the police, with incredible determination and courage. I want to celebrate that. I want to give their place, because when my father died, I said to my brother and sister that I will say something, and I will say something as myself, as Françoise, not as not for the family, because I wanted to say that of course he has been a revolutionary and very courageous, but it was also because of the people of Réunion. That without the people of Réunion, it might have been very, revolutionary. But it was this connection and how the people of Réunion. And I said this because there will be speech and there will be blah, 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 blah. And I wanted to say that. So for me, it's also to give back, to pay that debt to the people of Réunion, but also to people of Madagascar, to people of Algeria, to the people of Cuba, to all these people about whom I learned when I was a child, and that also gave me a map of the world, which was not the school map. So I knew what was happening. Algeria was at the dinner table, and India, and also Palestine, in fact, also. So even though it was later that I how can I say, I could make a theory or put word, but this was part of the world. It was part of my world. These were word, name that I heard. They were not names that I learned when I went to university or even with leftist group. They were names that I heard at the family table. And so it was there, and certainly it shaped also. And I want to show that how effectively words also name shape also how you see the world. So it was not just France, it was Cuba. I knew everything about Cuba, and my mother read a lot. And so it's also through literature, because there were a lot of books from all over the place. So I don't know, I read, I read George Amado when I was a teenager, not when I was. And so that world of internationalism that is so important for militancy, this is what I want to talk about. So through my parents' archive, through also my own archives, and through things I'm finding here and there, and showing again also that fighting, to be part of a struggle is a source of joy, is a source of incredible joy and a lot of freedom, because you understand how the world is made, and not something that, is obscure and you don't get it, and why is like that, and that's terrible, and what can I do? No, it makes sense. It makes sense. And the beauty of militancy also, there is a, for me, I was a child and I went to all these things in absolutely different social community among, the workers in the field or whatever. And for me, I was everywhere, and and the beauty of places, the beauty of people also shape, I think, my relation to beauty.
Yeah, which is at the heart of revolutionary struggle, whether that we're talking about Che or anybody who teaches us Leila Khaled about tenderness and love and as being part of a revolutionary struggle. I'm so moved by this project, and I'm moved especially because all the things we've been talking about refusals, about troubling, that you refuse to have the history of anti-colonial struggle in your family and in Réunion be sanitized, because we know that liberalism loves to claim people after the fact and after they've criminalized them and punished them and have engaged in collective punishment like of your family. Many years later, there's a claim to their life, and that claim oftentimes sanitizes the deep political commitments and anti-colonial project. And I feel so moved that part of your refusal is, no, I will tell this story exactly how it is, and this is what is the heart of it.
It drives me crazy. You know what they did to Mandela? Transform him into some kind of granddad, a nice granddad for, everyone, for humanity. I mean, this was someone who was sent for 27 years in jail, was, called a terrorist even by the French state, 5 years before his liberation. And then after it's like, oh, like that. And this pacification is absolutely an incredible tool. And so for me, it's the connection also on this very small island. The fact also you can fight everywhere. You don't need to be, you can fight everywhere. In your small place, it does not matter. It connects you to every struggle everywhere. And so fight where you are, don't, because now it's like, oh, we are a small island, and no, but you were a small island, and you were connected to the world, you were connected. I mean, there is something also I want to show, for instance, I remember a woman I knew, and I was often, she was a black woman, and, for, really from the popular classes. And she was a member of the Communist Party and a member of the Women's Union. And she went to Berlin and she went to other places. And that would have been possible as a person from Réunion, from the French state. So the opening also that militancy gave you, that you hear about, you listen to people, you meet people, you hear about other story, you compare to your own, that open your world, that, is incredible. It's part of the process of liberation. And this is what neoliberalism and colonization fight against. They want us to be isolated from each other. And also, or as an individual, you can come out if you are, nice and speak well, perhaps we will accept you, but never as a collective. And then isolation and division. And so this is also, I want to revive, because this is not particularly specific to Réunion, but okay, this place also, and the connection also with the southwest part, Mozambique and South Africa and Madagascar and Mauritius and Comoro. And also today, explaining the pacification, the process of pacification, that I think is also important. The French are quite good. I think, for me, they have really the Palme d'Or for colonization. They make the colonized want to be French.
Yes. And pretend that they're nice. Doing it. We're the nice colonizers. It has been soul quenching to be in conversation with you. Is there anything else you want to leave our audience with as we wrap up?
I don't know. We have to speak and speak and speak for Palestine and for Iran. We cannot stop. This is really, we have really to stop these people. They are really crapules, as we say in French. I don't know what there are the translation, but the cruelty that we see, which I think is in fact the answer to what we have been doing for so many years, so many of us everywhere, indigenous people everywhere, and the queer and the Palestinian and the Iranian. And so there is a real fear of the bourgeoisie, of the global bourgeoisie. So on the one hand, we have to be careful, we have to see they take us to the abyss, rather than with the climate disaster and the war. But at the same time, we have, I think, to understand that they fear us. They really fear us. That we have to keep, making them afraid. And we have to keep to be together and have joy.
Yes.
And love.
That's the political commitment. Thank you so much. Merci bien, comrade.
Yes, thank you.
I really appreciate
Merci.
it. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure everybody's going to love this. Until next time, inshallah.
Until next time. Ciao, ciao.